Today, we are going to try to do something a little bit difficult. We are going to try and dismantle a statue.
Figuratively speaking, of course.
Of course, but I am talking about a very specific statue. If you have ever been to New York City, and specifically to Grand Central Terminal, you've seen him.
Oh yeah, you can't miss it.
You really can't. There's this massive bronze figure standing right outside. He's got this heavy fur coat on, looks incredibly serious, very dignified, very
Established.
permanent. That's the word. Established. That is the Commodore, Cornelius Vanderbilt.
Right. And for most people, that statue, that image, is the whole story.
Exactly. When you hear the name Vanderbilt, you think of a few specific things. You think of the Gilded Age. You think of those massive Newport mansions.
Money. Dusty money. The kind of wealth that's always been there.
You think of the establishment, the absolute pillar of society.
But that's the problem, isn't it?
It is. We've been reading T.J. Stiles' biography, The First Tycoon, which, I should add, won the Pulitzer Prize for a reason. And Stiles argues that that statue, it's basically a lie.
Or maybe a half-truth. A mask.
A mask that hides who this guy actually was for most of his life?
Absolutely. The statue captures him at the very, very end of his life when he'd already won everything. But the story of how he won.
That's what we're here for.
It isn't dignified. It isn't static like a statue. It is violent. It is messy. And, well, it's revolutionary.
Revolutionary is a really strong word. I mean, we usually reserve that for guys in wigs like Washington or Jefferson.
And that is the absolute core of the tension we're exploring today.
Yeah.
Washington and Jefferson, they built the political structure of the United States. But Vanderbilt, Stiles, makes this incredible case that he's the one who built the economic structure.
He's the bridge.
He is the bridge between two completely different worlds, the world of the Founding Fathers, which was actually quite slow and aristocratic and based on deference,
Yeah.
and the modern world we live in right now.
The world of fierce, cutthroat competition.
Of meritocracy, or at least the idea of it, and speed. Everything getting faster.
So our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how this uneducated kid from a farm on Staten Island, I mean, a kid who literally couldn't spell correctly his entire life, managed to challenge the Constitution, rewrite the laws of American business, and become the richest man in the country.
They're not just the richest man. We are talking about a guy who, relative to the size of the economy, accumulated more wealth than almost anyone else in American history. More than Gates, more than Rockefeller.
That's staggering.
But you're right, it starts in the mud. On an island.
Let's go there then. Let's start at the beginning. 1794, Staten Island. Now, I think for a modern listener, when we say Staten Island, a certain image comes to mind.
The ferry. The suburbs.
Maybe Pete Davidson's movie, The King of Staten Island. It's a borough of New York City.
You have to wipe that image completely from your mind, just erase it. In 1794, Staten Island is basically the frontier. It is rural, it is agricultural, there are no paved roads, no bridges.
So it's just this isolated community.
A community of mostly Dutch farmers living in almost total isolation from the mainland.
But it's not total isolation, is it? Because of where they are physically located. That's the key.
It is the absolute key to understanding them. The Vanderbilt family lived in a place called Port Richmond, and if you stood on the shore near their little farmhouse and looked north across the water, across this channel called the Kill Van Cole, you could see it.
Manhattan.
The southern tip of Manhattan. You could see the city on a hill.
But not in a metaphorical sense. You could literally see it.
Literally. They called it the Emporium of Commerce.
Yeah.
You could see the masts of the ships from all over the world. You could see the church steeples. On a clear day, you could probably smell the money.
So you're standing in the mud, surrounded by pigs and farmland, but you have this constant, daily, visual reminder of wealth and power that is just right there.
Just out of reach.
Right.
Separated by a few miles of water. And for young Cornelius, that water wasn't just a barrier, it was the path.
Okay, let's talk about the Dutch part of this, because the book makes a really big deal about his heritage. And I have to admit, at first I thought, does it really matter? I mean, by 1790, hadn't the English been running New York for over a century? Wouldn't everyone just be sort of generically American by then?
You would think so, but culture is sticky. It hangs on for generations.
Yeah.
And the Vanderbilts were originally Vanderbilts. They spoke Dutch at home. They held on to their identity. And Stiles points out that this gave them a completely different psychological makeup compared to their English neighbors.
How so? What was the difference?
The English neighbors on Staten Island, for the most part, were operating on what you might call a competence model. or just subsistence farming.
So just getting by.
Yeah, the goal was to grow enough to eat, maybe trade a little surplus for some tea or sugar, and just keep your head down. It was very insular. The goal was to maintain the status quo.
Don't rock the boat.
Exactly. Don't rock the boat.
Hmm.
But the Dutch were historically a trading empire. They had a commercial mindset baked into their bones. Even the farmers were market-oriented.
So they weren't just growing corn to eat it.
They were growing corn to sell it. They were thrifty, sure, but they were always looking outward. They were constantly thinking about liquidity, how to turn labor into cash, how to turn produce into silver coins.
So he has this hustle in his DNA from the very beginning. But there's a specific aspect of this Dutch culture that really jumped out at me. And it has everything to do with his mother, Phoebe Han Vanderbilt.
This is one of the most critical insights in the entire book. To understand Cornelius, you have to understand Phoebe. Under English common law, which was the law of the land pretty much everywhere else in the United States, women had very, very few rights.
Right. There was this legal concept called coverture.
Coverture. Can you explain that for us?
Yeah, it means the woman is legally covered by her husband. When she married, her legal and financial identity was just gone. It was absorbed into his.
She became an extension of her husband. She couldn't sign contracts on her own. She couldn't own property separately. If she earned money, legally, it was his money.
But the Dutch on Staten Island didn't play by those rules.
Not in their private lives, no.
Yeah.
These Dutch communities held onto traditions from Roman Dutch law. And in that system, marriage was viewed more like a business partnership between two distinct estates. Women had far more authority. They managed their own money. They ran businesses. And Phoebe was the boss.
What about Cornelius's father, Cornelius Sr.? He sounds like a nice enough guy in the book.
He was a hard worker. He was a boatman. He was a farmer. But the source describes him as lacking vision. He was content. He was happy to just get by to do his job. He was a subsistence farmer.
Phoebe was the market-oriented one.
Phoebe was the engine of the family.
Yes.
Stiles calls her the CFO of the household. And that's not an exaggeration.
And she was ruthless about it, too. There's the famous story of the clock bank.
I love this detail. It's so vivid.
Tell us about it.
Whenever she made extra money, whether it was from selling produce she grew in her garden or from, doing odd jobs, she took the silver coins she earned and physically hid them inside the tall grandfather clock in their living room.
So it was her own private reserve, her capital.
It was her bank.
Yeah.
But she didn't just let it sit there and gather dust, right? She wasn't a hoarder.
No, she was a bank. A lender.
She lent that money out to neighbors, to friends, and she charged interest, commercial rates. She was running a private lending operation out of her living room clock.
And this is where we see the ruthless side. There's one story in the book that I actually had to read twice to make sure I understood it correctly. It involves her own daughter.
It's a brutal story, but it tells you everything you need to know about her mindset.
So Phoebe had lent money to her daughter and her son-in-law. They held a mortgage with her.
Right. And for whatever reason, the daughter fell behind on the payments.
Now, in most families, this is a point where the mom says, "It's okay, honey. Don't worry about it. Pay me when you can."
Not Phoebe. Phoebe foreclosed on them. She took the property from her own daughter.
That is ice cold.
It feels cold to us. But in her Dutch commercial mindset, it wasn't about cruelty. It was about the absolute sanctity of the contract. Business is business. The market is impersonal, doesn't care if you're family. If you break the contract, you face the consequences. Full stop.
And that is the soup that young Cornelius is swimming in as a kid. He sees his mom acting like a commercial bank. He sees the city of money just across the water, and he decides, I need to get in on this.
Which leads us directly to the founding myth of the entire Vanderbilt empire, the story of the periauger.
A periauger. It sounds exotic, but it's just a type of boat, right?
Yeah, it's a flat-bottomed, two-masted work boat. They're very common in New York Harbor at the time. It's not a racing yacht. It's ugly, it's slow, but it can carry a lot of cargo. It's a workhorse.
So Cornelius is 16 years old. He's sick of working for his dad on the farm and the boat. He wants to start his own ferry service. But he has no boat, and more importantly, no money.
So he goes to the only bank he knows, the clock bank.
He goes to his mother and asks for a loan, $100.
And we should pause here. $100 in 1810 is a massive amount of money. It's probably the equivalent of several $1,000s today, maybe more. It's a huge risk for her to take on a 16-year-old kid.
So does she just give it to him?
She's Phoebe. Of course not. She agrees, but there's a catch, a big one. She makes him a deal. She says, I will lend you the $100, but first, you have to plow and sow this specific 8-acre field on our farm.
And this wasn't like a nice, soft garden patch.
Oh, no. This was famously the worst piece of land they owned. It was rocky, it was rough, it was uncultivated. And the real kicker was the deadline. He had to have the entire thing plowed and planted by his birthday, which was May 1st. It was only a short time away.
So it was a
It
test.
was an impossible test. Physically, it was almost impossible for one person to do that much work in that amount of time.
This is a moment where most kids would just say, forget it, it's too hard, they'd give up. But this is where we see the first real spark of the tycoon. He doesn't just pick up the plow and start working himself to death, does he?
No. He looks at the problem differently. He realizes he can't do it alone. The problem isn't a lack of labor. It's a lack of capital to pay for labor. So he looks at the asset he's trying to acquire, the boat, and he realizes he can leverage it before he even owns it.
He's selling futures in his own career.
It's incredible. He goes to his friends, other teenage boys in the neighborhood, and he makes them a proposition. He says, if you guys help me plow this impossible field right now, I will give you free rides and let you sail my new boat once I get it.
He's monetizing an asset that doesn't exist yet.
Exactly. He's selling tickets to a boat he doesn't own to pay for the labor required to get the money to buy the boat. It is pure, brilliant leverage.
And of course it works.
It works perfectly. The friends, excited by the prospect of sailing, do the work. He meets the deadline. Phoebe, impressed, opens the clock, gives him the $100 in silver, and Cornelius Vanderbilt is officially in business.
So he becomes a shopkeeper of the sea. That's a phrase Styles uses that I really like, because we often think of sailors as adventurers, seeing the world. But Vanderbilt wasn't looking for adventure.
Not at all. He was a merchant. His boat was his store. He was hauling hay, oysters, shad, passengers, whatever paid. He worked 18-hour days. He was saving every single penny. He paid his mother back, with interest, incredibly quickly.
But he's still just one of many, many boatmen at this point. To really break out of the pack, he needed a lucky break, and that break came in the form of a war.
The War of 1812.
Right. The U.S. against Great Britain. Now, for most people in a port city like New York, this war was an absolute disaster.
A total catastrophe. The British Navy, the most powerful navy in the world, blockaded the port. Trade just stopped. Ships were rotting at the docks. The city's economy was strangled.
But for Vanderbilt,
Chaos is a ladder. The city was terrified of a British invasion, so it was heavily fortified. There were forts all over the harbor, Fort Richmond on Staten Island, the Battery, forts in New Jersey. And all those forts needed supplies.
they needed food, ammunition, and the troops needed to be moved around.
And who was the best, fastest, most reliable boatman in the harbor?
Young Cornelius Vanderbilt. But how does a kid with a small sailboat get a lucrative government contract?
He hustled. He went and put in a bid to provision the forts. Now, here's a really interesting part of the story. His father, Cornelius Sr., gave him some very conventional advice. He said, son, you have to bid low. Be the cheapest option. That's how you get the business.
Which is standard business advice, even today.
Right. But Cornelius didn't do that. He looked at the other bids and he put in a price that was fair, but is definitely not the cheapest. He got the contract.
Why? Why would the government knowingly overpay?
He was curious about that, too. He actually asked the military officer in charge that same question later. He said, why did you pick me when there were cheaper bids? And the officer said something that defined Vanderbilt's entire career. He said, because we want this business done, and we know you'll do it.
Wow. That's a powerful brand to have when you're not even 20 years old.
It's everything. In a world where everything was uncertain, the wind, the weather, the competence of the other boatmen, Vanderbilt was the one guy who was an absolute certainty. If he said the beef would be at the fort at dawn, it was there at dawn, even if he had to row through a hurricane to get it there. He wasn't selling transportation. He was selling certainty in a chaotic world.
So the war gives him his first real capital. He uses the profits to build a small fleet of schooners. He's doing really well for himself. He's the islander who made it. But then he does something that seems completely counterintuitive. He sells his boats.
He sells everything, his entire fleet, and he goes to work for someone else.
That makes no sense. He was his own boss. He had achieved the dream. Why on earth would he go back to being an employee?
Because he saw the ceiling. He was smart enough to realize that as long as he was just running sailboats, he was limited by the wind and the tide. He was a master of an old technology. He needed to learn the next level of the game. And to do that, he needed a mentor.
Enter Thomas Gibbons.
Thomas Gibbons. This guy is a character straight out of a movie. If Vanderbilt is the rough and tumble protagonist, Gibbons is the dark, complicated, wealthy mentor figure who teaches him the ways of the world.
Describe him for us. He sounds like a piece of work.
He's a Southerner, a very wealthy rice planter from Georgia, but his wealth is built on the backs of hundreds of slaves. He's obese, he's perpetually angry, and for some reason he's living in self-imposed exile in Elizabeth, New Jersey.
And politically, he's not exactly a patriot, is he?
Not even close. During the Revolutionary War, he was a Tory. He stayed loyal to the king, so he's a political outcast. But his defining characteristic is that he is incredibly litigious. He loves to sue people. He's constantly challenging people to duels. He carries a pistol and a horsewhip with him.
He sounds like an absolute nightmare to work for.
He was notoriously difficult. But he and Vanderbilt had something very important in common. A shared enemy. The New York elite.
The establishment.
Right. Gibbons hated the New York aristocracy because they were patriots who looked down on him as a Tory. Vanderbilt hated them, or at least he wanted to beat them, because they controlled all the access to real wealth. So in 1817, Gibbons hires Vanderbilt to captain a small, insignificant steamboat he owns. It was called the Mouse.
The Mouse. Not exactly a name that strikes fear into the hearts of your enemies.
There's a tiny, pathetic little boat. But this is the moment everything changes for Vanderbilt, because he isn't just learning how to run a bigger business. He's learning an entirely new technology, steam.
You know, we take engines for granted today. But for a sailor like Vanderbilt, a master of the wind, moving from sail to steam must have been a massive psychological shift.
It was a total rejection of nature. If you're a master sailor, you are a partner with the wind. You have to wait for it. You have to understand it and negotiate with it. If the tide is against you, you stop and wait. Your life is governed by natural forces.
But steam...
Steam ignores the wind. Steam fights the tide. Steam doesn't care about nature.
It's the imposition of human will over the natural world.
Exactly. And the single most important thing that steam gave you was a schedule. For the first time in human history, you could say, I will leave at 6 a.m. and I will arrive at 9 a.m. and it would actually happen. Vanderbilt realized that reliability, his core brand, could be scaled up infinitely with steam.
So he dives in. He doesn't just pilot the boat, he learns the mechanics.
He becomes obsessed. He spent all his spare time at the engine works of a man named James P. Allaire. He learned about pistons, boilers, pressure, fuel consumption. He wasn't just a guy standing at the wheel. He understood the machine in the belly of the boat better than the engineers who built it.
So now he has the technology, he has the mentor in Gibbons, but now they run headfirst into a wall. The Great Monopoly War.
This is Section 3. And this is really the heart of the story. This is the battle that literally defined the future of the American economy.
Let's explain the setup here. Because when we hear the word monopoly today, we think of a company that's just so big and successful, it dominates the market, like a Google or an Amazon. But this was different.
This was a state-sponsored monopoly. It was a matter of law. The state of New York had passed a law granting Robert Fulton, the famous inventor of the steamboat, and his incredibly wealthy financial backer, Robert Livingston, the exclusive right to operate steamboats in all New York waters.
Exclusive meaning no one else is allowed at all.
No one else. If you wanted to run a steamboat from, say, Albany to New York City, you had to pay the Livingstons a huge fee for a license. If you didn't pay, they had the legal right to have the sheriff seize your boat and your cargo.
That sounds more like a feudal system than a free market.
That's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
It was a holdover from the old European economic model called mercantilism. The idea was that the state should organize the economy by granting special privileges to elite aristocratic families. The Livingstons were the definition of elite. They were old world. They believed in order and hierarchy and deference to your betters.
And Gibbons and Vanderbilt, the angry Tory and the upstart from Staten Island, said no.
Gibbons wanted to run a steamboat line from New Jersey to New York. The monopoly said, you can't do that. Gibbons essentially said, try and stop me. So he starts running an illegal steamboat line in direct defiance of New York law. And he puts Cornelius Vanderbilt in charge of the boat, a new, bigger boat called the Bellona.
The goddess of war.
A fitting name. And this is where Vanderbilt becomes the guerrilla warrior. Because he is now a commercial outlaw, literally dodging the police every single day.
It becomes this high-stakes game of cat and mouse in New York Harbor. The New York sheriffs are waiting at the dock in Manhattan to arrest Vanderbilt every time he lands.
So how did he avoid them? This is where his cleverness shines.
He got incredibly creative. He actually had a carpenter build a secret closet, a hidden compartment inside the hull of the Bellona. Just as the boat would dock, he would dive into the closet and lock it from the inside.
So the sheriffs would board. They'd search for the captain, they'd find no one in charge, and they'd have to leave, completely confused.
For the pilot trick, that one's my favorite.
It's brilliant. The law at the time stated that the authorities had to arrest the man in charge of the vessel, the captain. So as the Bologna approached the New York dock, Vanderbilt would hand the wheel over to a young woman.
A woman in the 1820s.
Exactly. The police would jump aboard, all puffed up and ready to arrest the captain, and they'd see a woman steering the ship into the dock. They were completely baffled. They had no idea what to do. Can we arrest her? Is she the captain? By the time they figured it out, Vanderbilt had slipped away into the crowd.
He was openly mocking them.
He loved it. He raised a flag of truce on his mast one time as if he were landing in enemy territory. He treated the whole thing like a grand, glorious war. He was arrested a few times, but he always managed to get out on some legal technicality. He was fighting the physical battle on the water.
But while Vanderbilt is ducking into closets and hiring female pilots, his boss, Gibbons, is fighting the legal battle. And he hires some absolute heavy hitters.
The best money could buy. He hires Daniel Webster and William Wirt. These are the most famous, most respected lawyers in all of America. And Gibbons pushes the case all the way to the United States Supreme Court. The case is known as Gibbons v. Ogden.
We really have to unpack this case because it sounds dry and legal, but the implications are absolutely massive. What was the core legal question here?
The core question was about the very definition of the United States. The monopoly represented by the Livingstons and their partner Ogden argued that New York was a sovereign state. They said, in effect, we have the right to close our borders to commerce if we want to. We have the right to decide who does business in our waters.
If that argument wins, then the United States isn't really one country, is it? It's just a loose collection of little countries, like Europe.
That's the perfect analogy. If New York can ban New Jersey steamboats, then Pennsylvania can put a huge tax on Ohio corn. Virginia can close its ports to ships from Maryland. It would have completely strangled the American economy before it even had a chance to be born.
So what was Daniel Webster's counter-argument?
He argued that the Constitution gave the federal government, not the states, the power to regulate commerce among the several states. And the key legal question boiled down to one word. What does commerce actually mean?
Is it just the act of buying and selling something?
That's what the monopoly's lawyers argued. But Webster argued, and Chief Justice John Marshall ultimately agreed, that commerce is intercourse.
Intercourse.
It means interaction. It's not just the sale of goods. It's the movement of goods. It's navigation. It's the flow of people and ideas across state lines. And Marshall ruled that because commerce, by its nature, flows between states, no single state has the right to stop it. He struck down the New York monopoly.
And this ruling is sometimes called the Emancipation Proclamation of American Commerce.
It really was. It was a thunderclap. It killed the idea of state-sponsored monopolies overnight. It effectively turned the entire United States into the world's largest free trade zone. It unleashed the competitive forces of the market on a continental scale.
So the monopoly is dead, the waters are open. You would think this is the happy ending where everyone shakes hands and competes fairly and makes a decent living.
Oh no, no. This is where the real violence starts.
The war of all against all.
Once that legal barrier was gone, anyone with a boiler and a hull could start a steamboat line. The Hudson River was suddenly flooded with competitors. And Vanderbilt, he didn't relax. He went into pure attack mode. And this brings us to Section 4, the rise of the competitive economic man.
Before this, business was often about who you knew, what family you were from. Now, it was purely about who could survive. How did Vanderbilt fight in this new world?
He fought with the most brutal weapon he had, price. He introduced a concept that terrified the old gentlemanly elites, the price war.
How low did he drop the fares?
Okay, so the standard fare for the popular route from New Brunswick to New York was about $3 or $4. Vanderbilt came in and dropped it to $1. His competitors panicked, matched him. He dropped it to 50 cents.
Then 25.
Then 10 cents. Then he did the unthinkable.
How can you make a profit on 10 cents a passenger?
You can't. But then he went even further. You drop the fare to $0. Free.
Okay, wait a second. Explain the economics of free. He's burning expensive coal, he's paying a crew, he has maintenance costs. How does he not go bankrupt instantly?
He had two brilliant strategies.
Yeah.
First, while the ride was free, he sold food and drinks on board. If you pack the boat with 1,000 people because the ride is free, and half of them buy a sandwich and a beer, you can more than cover your fuel costs.
It's the loss leader strategy 150 years before Walmart.
It's pure modern retail theory. And the second way was even more ruthless.
Which was?
He had deeper pockets, or at least stronger nerves, than his competitors. He knew that if he charged zero, they would have to charge zero just to keep their passengers, but they couldn't sustain it. He would bleed them dry week after week until they either went bankrupt or sold their boats to him for pennies on the dollar.
It's completely predatory.
It's purely predatory. The old generation of merchants believed in a fair price, or a natural price, for a service. Vanderbilt believed the price was a weapon to be used to annihilate his competition.
But it wasn't just about money, it was about speed. And this is where the story gets physically dangerous for everyone involved.
Americans in the 1820s were obsessed with speed. It was a national mania. They called it the go-ahead spirit. And steamboats became the ultimate expression of this. They would literally race each other side by side down the Hudson River.
Like a drag race on water.
Yes, but with these massive multi-ton vessels filled with hundreds of cheering passengers. The captains would be on deck shouting insults at each other. The passengers would be placing bets. And the engine room crews would throw anything they could find into the furnace tar, bacon, wooden chairs, furniture, anything to get the fire hotter and the pressure higher.
But a steam boiler is basically a controlled bomb if you push it too hard.
It explodes. And they did. All the time. There's the horrifying story of the steamboat legislator in 1825. Vanderbilt was racing against this boat neck and neck down the river. To get an edge, the crew of the legislator climbed on top of the boiler and literally tied down the safety valve to build up more pressure.
That is a death wish.
And it was. The boiler exploded with a sound that was heard miles away. It scalded people to death instantly. It was a horrific, bloody scene.
Did that disaster make Vanderbilt slow down? Did it make him think about safety?
No. He used it as a marketing opportunity. He immediately started advertising that all of his boats had low-pressure engines, implying that they were safer.
But was that true?
Not really. The reality was he pushed his low-pressure engines just as hard, if not harder, than everyone else. He was a master of public perception. He sold the idea of safety while still racing at top speed.
There's another tactic he used that the source calls the tricky god tactic. It sounds almost like a form of blackmail.
It effectively was. This shows his evolution from a competitor to a manipulator of the entire market. Vanderbilt started a new boat line called the Dispatch Line. He didn't really want to run it. He didn't need the money from that route. He started it for one reason only: to harass a major competitor, the Stevens brothers, who owned the powerful Union Line.
So he was just being a nuisance.
An incredibly expensive and effective nuisance. He was undercutting their prices, stealing their passengers, scheduling his boats to leave minutes before theirs. He was making their lives a living hell and costing them a fortune. Finally, the Stevens brothers came to him defeated and said, "What will it take for you to stop?"
And he gave them a number.
He gave them a huge number, a massive annual payment, and they paid it. They paid him a fortune to stop working.
So he got paid to quit.
He learned that his capacity for destruction was an asset in and of itself. If you are dangerous enough, people will pay you just to go away. That is a very dark but very modern business lesson.
So this paints a picture of a man who is brilliant, ruthless, and dangerous in his public and business life. But what was he like as a human being? Section 5 takes us into his private life. And honestly, it makes the business stuff look almost friendly by comparison.
Yeah, this is where we have to look at the immense personal cost of being the economic man. Stiles makes a powerful case that Vanderbilt viewed every human relationship as a transaction, even his own marriage.
Let's talk about his wife, Sophia. They were actually first cousins. They grew up together on Staten Island.
They did. And by all accounts, she was a hardworking, loyal, traditional wife for that era. But during the Monopoly War, Vanderbilt moved the entire family to New Brunswick, New Jersey, to a big inn on the river called Bologna Hall.
And he put Sophia in charge of running it?
She ran the entire place. She managed the kitchen, the cleaning staff, the rowdy guests. She was working incredibly hard, all while being pregnant almost constantly. She eventually gave birth to 13 children over the course of her life.
So Vanderbilt is out on the water, becoming a legend, making a fortune, and Sophia is running the inn and raising this massive family. What was the financial arrangement between them?
This is the part of the story that is really hard to stomach. Vanderbilt told her that she had to pay for all the household expenses, the food for their children, their clothing, their education, out of her earnings from running the inn.
Wait, let me get this straight. He's the rich tycoon, and he's making his wife pay for their kids' food and clothes.
That's right. He didn't view his growing fortune as family money. He viewed it as capital. And capital was sacred. Capital was for buying ships. Capital was for business expansion. The family was a separate entity, a different department that needed to be self-sustaining.
He treated his own family like a subsidiary company that had to break even.
That's the perfect way to put it. You are the manager of the family division, Sophia. Make sure you don't run a deficit.
How did the children feel about this as they grew up?
They resented him deeply. Years later, there was a massive court battle over his will, and the testimony from the children is just heartbreaking. They described him as distant, stern, and, frankly, terrifying. They all revered their mother because she was the one who actually raised them and showed them affection. To Vanderbilt, children were often just overhead, an expense.
And he wasn't just emotionally cold, he was a physically violent man. We keep saying he was a brawler, but let's give a specific example. The breakfast fight.
This is a classic Vanderbilt story. He's the captain of his own steamboat. He walks into the dining cabin for breakfast. There is a customary seat at the head of the main table where the captain always sits.
And someone is in his seat.
A lawyer, of all people, named Patrick Rice. Vanderbilt tells him to move. Rice refuses, maybe trying to make a point. Vanderbilt doesn't argue. He doesn't call for a steward. He physically grabs Rice and throws him across the room.
Problem solved.
Not quite. Rice, humiliated, comes back. He sneaks back into the seat later on, maybe thinking Vanderbilt was just bluffing.
That was a very bad move.
A terrible move. Vanderbilt comes back, sees him, and just beats him up. Then he drags him up the stairs to the pilot house and locks him inside for the rest of the trip.
He kidnapped a passenger.
He detained him. Rice sued him, of course. But Vanderbilt, in a move that tells you everything, countersued Rice for provoking him. The point is, this wasn't a CEO sitting in a boardroom making strategic decisions. This was a man who solved problems with his fists.
There's another story, too, about a pickpocket in Manhattan.
Right. It shows that this wasn't just about his authority on his boat. Vanderbilt is walking through the city. He feels a hand in his pocket and realizes his wallet is gone. He spots the guy running away.
And he doesn't shout for the police.
No. He chases him down himself. And remember, Vanderbilt is a big, strong, physical man. He tackles the guy in the middle of the street and then personally drags him, kicking and screaming, all the way to the police station.
He is just a raw force of nature.
He's pure energy and pure obsession. There's one more little anecdote that sums it all up for me. His boat, the Emerald, catches fire at the dock in the middle of the night. Vanderbilt is asleep on board. He wakes up, sees the flames, and his first instinct isn't just to save himself. He cuts the mooring lines to let the boat drift away from the wharf so it doesn't burn down the whole dock. He saves the infrastructure.
But the newspaper report about the fire mentions a specific detail about his personal belongings.
It's a single line. It says he lost every article of clothing in the fire.
Which implies...
It implies he was living on the boat. He wasn't at home with Sophia and the kids. He wasn't sleeping in a comfortable bed. He was sleeping on a cot on his boat. He was working 2 over 7. The business wasn't part of his life. The business was his life. Everything else, his wife, his children, his own comfort, was secondary.
So we have this fully formed picture of a man who is a machine. He is the economic man made flesh. And as we move to the end of this deep dive, we see the world itself changing around him, making way for him.
The great transition of power. The year 1826 is a pivotal year in American history.
Why 1826 specifically?
A couple of reasons. First, Thomas Gibbons, Vanderbilt's difficult but essential mentor, dies. But even more symbolically, on July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary to the day of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, both Thomas Jefferson and John Adams die.
Within hours of each other. It's an unbelievable historical coincidence.
It's the end of an era. The founding fathers are gone. The men of the Enlightenment, the philosophers, the gentlemen aristocrats, they have officially left the stage.
And who is standing there in the spotlight, ready to take their place?
Cornelius Vanderbilt. He's now in his early 30s. He's independent. He's incredibly wealthy. And he is terrifyingly ambitious. He has outgrown his mentor. He has outgrown the old laws and the old ways of doing things.
He started in a world powered by sales, defined by silence and deference, and now he is building a world powered by steam, defined by noise and schedules.
He's the architect of the new economy.
So we have to land this plane. We started this deep dive by looking at that statue, the robber baron, the great villain of the Gilded Age. But based on everything we've just talked about, the war against the aristocratic monopoly, the radical lowering of prices, is villain really the right word for this early version of him?
It's way too simple. Stiles argues that in these early days, Vanderbilt was, in a strange way, a radical force.
A radical? For the common man, that seems like a stretch.
In effect, yes. Think about what he actually did. He destroyed the legally protected monopolies that only benefited rich, established families. He lowered the price of travel so much that for the first time, a common laborer could afford to take a steamboat from New York to Philadelphia. He democratized movement and commerce.
But he didn't do any of that out of the goodness of his heart. He wasn't a social crusader.
Absolutely not. He did it to win. He did it to get rich and crush his enemies.
Mhm.
But that's the great paradox of capitalism that he embodies, isn't it? His relentless, selfish drive created an enormous public benefit. He wasn't trying to be a hero, but in his quest for domination, he built the infrastructure that allowed the modern United States to grow.
So he did the right things, but for all the wrong reasons.
Or maybe for the only reasons that actually create that kind of explosive change in a market economy. He's messy, he's violent, he's greedy, but he is undeniably, powerfully constructive.
To understand Vanderbilt is to understand the birth of the American economy. Messy, violent, and undeniably powerful.
That sums it up perfectly.
Before we go, I want to leave you, the listener, with one last provocative thought. We've talked about all the tools Vanderbilt used. He used the courts, he used price wars, he used technology, he used violence. But what tool didn't he use?
That's maybe the most interesting part of his story. He never, ever ran for political office. He never tried to be a governor or a senator. The Livingstons, the DeWitt Clintons, the old elites, they believed that power came from politics. They thought real power was holding office, passing laws.
Vanderbilt had a different idea.
Vanderbilt was one of the first people to fully grasp that in this new America, the real ultimate power wasn't going to be in the state house. It was going to be in the marketplace. He understood that you could become more powerful than the government just by controlling the economic arteries of the nation.
He didn't need to be the president. He could just buy the president.
Or at the very least, he could ignore him. And that was a radical new idea of power.
That is a terrifying thought. And also, looking around at our world today, a very, very modern one.
It's the world he built. We're all just living in it.
Well, on that note, we will leave you to think about the Commodore. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
See you next time.